Some final thoughts on the Rangers' 6-game series against the Florida Panthers. What went wrong? What were some key moments and some what-ifs? Plus, will all three of Panarin, Zibanejad, and Kreider be back next season after a rough conference final?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1082 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And this episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we continue to kind of just do our round of post-mortem episodes here for the New York Rangers. Obviously, a rough way to go out. Had the 2-1 lead in the conference final, lose 3 straight games, and just as quick as that, your season is over. And, the last episode, we kind of focused it on Game 6, and I called out Jacob Trouba in a way that I probably have not called out any single Ranger player since I've been doing this podcast, and we are over 1,000 episodes. If you missed that, it's definitely worth your time. Go back and catch the last episode for sure. But for right now, look, Trouba, as bad as he was and as unacceptable as his play was from a guy making as much as he does, and the fact that he is the Ranger captain, he was not alone. There were other Ranger players did not get the job done either, and I think we can kind of today take a look all together now at what I would call the big three, the three highest paid New York Ranger forwards, and that would, of course, be Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, and Artemi Panarin. They obviously had some big moments in the playoffs, but they fizzled out in the Eastern Conference Final and just were not good enough to get the job done. When those three players combined for a grand total of 2 goals, it's just not going to happen for you, and it didn't happen for the Rangers, and that's one of the biggest reasons. The star players just not playing like star players when it mattered the most in the conference final. And we'll go kind of one at a time here. We'll start with Mika Zibanejad. Now, you look at his playoff stats here, 16 points in 16 games. If you just look at it that way, it's like, well, he must have been great. And there were moments, again, where he was very good. But obviously, it was the tale of like 2 different playoff runs for Mika Zibanejad within the one Ranger playoff run. It also goes to show that stats are not everything and points are not everything, because anybody that watched this series against the Panthers know that Mika Zibanejad struggled and just was not himself, and obviously not good enough to lead the Rangers to a win here. And as I mentioned, a tale of 2 different playoff runs for Mika. Those 16 points in the 16 games, again, it sounds nice on the surface, but they're very front-loaded. Of his 16 points, 13 of them happened between Game 1 against the Caps and Game 4 against the Canes, and then just 3 points the rest of the way after that. And, of course, he goes 11 games without scoring a goal. And, look, we can give the Panthers props, and we've done that. Obviously, they're a tremendous defensive team, and that forecheck, you're so far back on your heels that it's tough to do anything offensively. But the bottom line, you cannot have your number one center go into a scoring drought such as that and expect to just keep advancing your way through the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's just probably not going to happen. And obviously, Mika struggles. One of the biggest reasons why the Rangers, did not advance to the Stanley Cup final. And I think, a play that's it's gonna sort of be a lasting image of that series, fairly or unfairly, because a lot of players didn't play their best, and there were other things that happened too, but. That puck in Game 6 that bounced right in front of the net to him, and he can't bury it right there from the doorstep, would have tied the game and obviously gotten the Rangers back into it, and it just didn't happen. For Chris Kreider, look, for his career, a pretty solid playoff performer over the years for the New York Rangers. He's really up there in the stat of most goals scored by a player when his team is facing elimination. He might actually have the record for that, and if he doesn't, he's very close to it, but you see that stat pop up every now and then, so it's good that he can be clutch in certain situations, but obviously didn't happen here in Game 6 against the Panthers, and really didn't happen for the entire series for Kreider as a whole. You had some hope in Game 5. He scores that breakaway goal while the Rangers are shorthanded. That gives them a 1-0 lead, and okay, here we go. We got the lead. Maybe we get back into this series. We take control here. Maybe Kreider's going to find it. We know when he gets hot, he can carry a team offensively. You're thinking maybe, with that stat I just threw out there about goals when facing elimination, that maybe he's going to go out there in game 6 against Florida and have a big game. And obviously that did not happen either. And like with Mika Zibanejad, his final playoff numbers, if you just look at his stats, Kreider, they're certainly not atrocious. He had 8 goals and 4 assists in the 16 games, but once again, very, very front-loaded. First 7 playoff games for Kreider, 4 goals, 3 assists, awesome. The last 9 playoff games, not so much. He had 4 goals and 1 assist. And of course, he did, during that second stretch there, have that legendary performance against the Canes where they win game 6 and he gets the natural hat trick there and sends the Rangers to the conference final. And that's all well and good, and you can't take that away from him. But if you put that game aside, the other 8 games, the 8 of the 9, final playoff games that the Rangers played, 2 points. I mean, that's just not good enough. So that's just not going to work. And obviously, again, what happened with Kreider as far as like the tip-in magic is concerned, because that's one of those things that shouldn't slump. Anybody can get suffocated defensively. And, I mentioned the Panthers forecheck a while ago. And obviously, that keeps the Rangers pinned in their own zone. They expend a bunch of energy just getting the puck out of their zone. They can't do anything offensively. But when the Rangers are on the power play, what happened to the deflections, the redirections, the magic that Chris Kreider can pull when he's in the zone? That's not the kind of thing that should really slump, because, when you're on the power play, you're going to get set up in the offensive zone sooner or later. And that just was nowhere to be found throughout this entire series. So that's obviously very disappointing. And then Panarin, I mean, it's basically the same story as the other two. The numbers look pretty good for Panarin overall. Not quite the same pace as the regular season, but that's to be at least somewhat expected. That's just the nature of playoff hockey. But in 16 games, 5 goals and 10 assists. He had the 4 game-winning goals. Obviously, the overtime winner in Game 3 against the Canes. He certainly had his moments, but again, same thing with Mika and Kreider. The well pretty much ran dry after that. This was obviously much better, what we got from Panarin this year, than what we saw last year when he had 2 points in 7 games. But again, you look at his playoff run this year, the first 7 games, 4 goals and 5 assists of this playoff run. The last 9 games, 1 goal and 5 assists. And he went 8 games in a row without scoring a goal. Would have been 9. He got that goal near the end of game 6 to give us all just that little bit of hope that maybe they could pull a rabbit out of the hat. And obviously that didn't happen. And just a classic case of too little and too late. You watch the power play, and all 3 of these players are obviously a massive part of that. They're all, entrenched on the top unit there. No matter how well Lafreniere plays, he can't crack the top unit, which was unfortunate. But these guys, on the power play, the power play in general didn't get it done, and they all stopped shooting. I mean, there were times where the Rangers would be on the man advantage, and it would look like they were out there just trying to play a game of keep away. And I realized, you got to make some passes and open some things up and everything. I don't want to be that guy that just he'll shoot the entire game, but by that same token, shoot the puck. They just wouldn't shoot, and the power play struggled as a result of it. That wasn't the only reason the Ranger power play struggled, but that was obviously one of the reasons. And the thing that, makes their poor performance in this conference final, these 3 players, that makes it, that much more disappointing, frustrating, infuriating, whatever emotion you might be feeling right now is probably not good. But what makes it worse is, the Rangers, they were getting outplayed by the Panthers for most of this series. And despite that being the case, they still got up 2-1 after 3 games. And you're thinking like, okay, this is maybe a good thing. Our star players aren't playing their best, but we're still finding a way to get it done. We're getting an overtime winner from Barclay Goodrow. We're getting another overtime winner from Alex Wenberg. All right, maybe this is the team of destiny, right? And then the star players will eventually figure it out. They're due for a big game in Game 4. And it just never happened because, again, the fact that secondary players, and I wouldn't even call guys like Trocheck and Lafreniere secondary players, but those guys obviously stepped up in a big way. Barclay Goodrow turned into Wayne Gretzky for a little while there. The fact that other guys were contributing, scoring goals, and helping the team in other ways, and they kept winning in spite of the star players not scoring goals, that at the time looked like a positive thing. And you're thinking eventually they'll turn the corner here. That corner never got turned. You go into Game 4, okay, maybe this is the game, and obviously it doesn't happen there. They lose in overtime, and Mika Zibanejad with the bad play in the overtime. Game 5, okay, we're back at home. Let's take control of this series. We get the shorty from Chris Kreider. Mika had the assist on that one. Okay, here we go. And again, the well runs dry, and nothing really happens after that. And then Game 6, it's the same deal. Shutout for 58-plus minutes. You get the 1 goal at the end, but again, classic case of too little, too late. So these Rangers star players kept being afforded more and more chances to eventually get things figured out, eventually get things turned around, eventually put the puck in the net with at least some regularity, and they were just never able to do it. And you can't look at this and look at the Panthers and not give them credit for what they did. They did an awesome job on the forecheck, as I've been mentioning. A lot of the Rangers' failures in this series, you can chalk it up to the Panthers doing what they do and just being a darn good hockey team. You could also, as it pertains to the star players not scoring, you can put some blame on the Ranger defensemen. They had a tough series and had such a difficult time getting the puck out of their own zone. All that has some truth in it, but the bottom line, you need more from your top three forwards, regardless of who you're playing or how the series unfolds or what's happening. Sooner or later, you just need a little bit more offense from those guys. And you kept thinking that eventually, that they might turn the corner, as I was saying, and it just never happened. So, yeah, got to have better performance from those three players. It also leads me into a conversation that we're going to have in just a second here. I want to talk about Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, Chris Kreider, what the long-term future looks like with the Rangers. Will all three of those players even be back with the New York Rangers next season? We will discuss that in just a second. All right, we want to take a minute and let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner-take-all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and much, much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Did want to give a shout out to the everydayers. Thank you guys again so much for being on this journey with me, from the offseason, preseason, regular season, postseason. It's always a lot of fun. Obviously, we didn't get the ending that we wanted this year, but again, it does mean a lot that you guys always tune in and definitely stick with us in the offseason here. In our next episode, we're going to reevaluate Chris Drury's poor performance at the NHL trade deadline this season. I believe it's easily his worst trade deadline as the Ranger GM, while this window has been open here. Also going to be looking to review in a future episode the E60 documentary that's going to debut on Tuesday night at 9 o'clock on ESPN. It covers the Rangers' 1994 Stanley Cup winning team, and going to do a lot of draft talk. The draft is less than a month away. It happens on Friday, June 28th and Saturday, June 29th. So we're right there. We're already into June here. Going to talk about some of the Rangers options with the number 30 overall pick there in the first round. But we'll save that stuff for another day. For right now, let's keep the focus on Zibanejad, Panarin, and Kreider. Will all three of those players be back with the New York Rangers? The short answer is yes. I think all three players probably will return for a variety of reasons, which we're going to go through right here and right now. For starters, everybody's emotional at the end of the season, and I totally get it because it was right there for this team. Best record in the NHL, starting the playoffs 7-0, all these overtime theatrics, Igor Shesterkin just really outdoing himself. I mean, he's a phenomenal goalie. We all know that. And he took his game to a whole other level in the playoffs this year. Really feel for him. But, you've got people saying trade this guy and buy out that guy and do this and do that. As far as a buyout, let's just go ahead and squash any possibility of this happening with Panarin or Zibanejad or Kreider. With Trouba, it's something that's on the table, and I think it's something that needs to be very seriously considered by the Rangers this offseason. But for these three players, it would not make any sense whatsoever. I think sometimes people hear the term buyout and they think like, oh, you just buy them out of their contract, you pay them a little bit, and you're off the hook. It doesn't really work that way. As far as buyouts for certain players, it's different for every guy. It has to do with, how many years are left on your contract and how much is your contract paying you. It also has to do with, your age, how long you've been in the league. That's why the Rangers were able to buy out Tony DeAngelo. He was young enough they could buy him out and owe him a very small percentage of what was still on the contract. And as a result, the cap hit was very small for Tony DeAngelo. I believe it was only in the high six figures. So that didn't really cost the Rangers too much. As for these players, though, first of all, I would not buy out Artemi Panarin under almost any circumstances, but listen to this and understand just how ridiculous it would really be. So with Panarin, if they were to buy him out, it would still result in the Rangers having a cap hit of nearly $11 million next season. It's just a shade under $11 million. They would save only $667,000 to have Artemi Panarin not play hockey for them. So that is completely off the table, and there's no way they would ever consider doing that. Mika Zibanejad buyout, it's just as crazy because it would save the Rangers, again, only $667,000 in all of the next 6 years. There would still be a $7.83 million cap hit for Mika Zibanejad to not play hockey for the New York Rangers. That's almost his entire salary. So a buyout of either one of those players is just completely insane. There's no way any GM on this planet would even consider doing it. Now, a Kreider buyout, it's not in quite the same realm of insanity as Panarin and Zibanejad, but it still would make no sense. You would save $3.44 million in each of the next 2 seasons, and then $2.44 million the year after that. But you're still paying Kreider money. The cap hit in those 3 years, respectively, is $3 million, $3 million again, and then $4 million. And again, this is all for Chris Kreider to not play hockey for the New York Rangers. And the 3 years after that, it would be a cap hit of $1.55 million every year. So you'd be paying Chris Kreider a good amount of money for 6 straight years to not play hockey. It doesn't make any sense. A buyout is completely off the table for all 3 of these players. Now let us never speak of it again. As far as anything else, the rest of the situation here and how it looks, Panarin, believe it or not, is now down to just 2 years remaining on his contract. He does have a full no-move clause. Mika Zibanejad has 6 years left on his deal. He has a full no-move clause right up until a week before the trade deadline of the final year of his contract. So for all intents and purposes, a full no-move clause all the way through. Kreider, beginning on July 1st of this year, if I'm understanding cap-friendly correctly here, it looks like to me that beginning on July 1st, so a little bit less than a month away, his full no-move clause that he's had for the first 4 years of this deal, it becomes a modified no-trade clause. And at that point, Kreider submits a 15-team no-trade list. So again, if I'm understanding this correctly, and I'm surprised nobody's really talked about this at all, and I'm not advocating for a Kreider trade, I would not do that, but it does sound like that's an option that at least becomes on the table for the New York Rangers once we get to July 1st of this year. And at that point, in theory, the Rangers could trade Kreider to any of 16 different teams around the league. Once again, I'm not advocating for that. If I was going to trade any of these 3 players, it would probably be Mika Zibanejad, but I don't even really think I would do that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because look at all the hurdles you'd have to get over here. First of all, the full no-move clause. Guys have this put in their contract for a reason. They're leaving a little bit of money on the table to do that. It's all part of the negotiations. So if you get that into your contract, it's there, it's ironclad, and you have every single right to refuse a trade. That's part of the deal that you signed, and guys should not be pressured into having to waive their no-move clause. And they're under absolutely no obligation to do so, whether it's Mika Zibanejad or anybody else from around this league. On top of that, $8 million contract for the next 6 years. That's quite the cap hit to take on. Even if Mika was willing to waive his no-move clause and the Rangers really wanted to deal him, that's quite the contract for another team to take on. I'm not sure. I'm not going to say it's completely impossible, but even, really any player, unless it's like Connor McDavid. I mean, that's a lot, and it's a difficult contract to move for that reason. And a big problem from the Rangers' point of view, let's say that like there was a team willing to take on his contract, and Mika wants to head for the door, which I don't think is true. I don't think that's true of Mika Zibanejad. But if he wanted to leave, and the Rangers were willing to do it, and there was another team willing to step in and be the Rangers' dance partner in a trade, the biggest problem for me here, even if you could pull it off, is that trading Mika Zibanejad, I don't know how you replace him in this lineup. I don't know who becomes the other center in the top 6. Obviously, Vincent Trocheck is one of them, but who would be the other one? I mean, Philip Hedl, it's awesome that he came back this year. He's obviously, though, got a lot of concussion history. There's no way possible that you can rely on Philip Hedl to be healthy for a large chunk of next season. We don't know what the future holds for Philip Hedl, so you can't count on him. Barclay Goodrow, great playoff showing. He's not a top 6 center. I don't think there's any way possible. Only 4 goals in the regular season. That's just not going to cut it. Johnny Brodzinski, I like Brodzinski. He's a bottom 6 forward. I just don't think that he's somebody that on a cup contending team, you throw him out there on the top line or the second line, whatever line that would be. And there's no big prospect in the minors either, at least not at center. We know about some of the other guys. Brandon Hoffman's going to be a player. Brett Berard coming into his own. Probably not next season, but Gabe Perreault, he'll eventually make an impact. All those guys are wingers. You look at the centers in the minors for the Rangers, and there's some prospects there for sure, but a lot of these guys are like 19 or 20 years old. They're not ready for the NHL, and they're certainly not ready to replace the kind of production that Mika Zibanejad presents every single season. So, I mean, you could trade Mika in theory if he waives the no move and the Rangers want to do this. You could trade him for another center. You could bring in another center via free agency. We'll look at free agents in the future here, but it's just not something that really seems to make a lot of sense. And because this is a usually positive Ranger podcast, and because we like to be glass half full on here, I do just want to throw out the idea here. As down as people are on Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider and Artemi Panarin, there have been a lot of examples in recent history here around the NHL of teams that mostly stuck with the same core of players, even though they weren't getting over the hump and they weren't getting over the hump, that eventually did get over the hump. Tampa Bay, I think that's maybe the best example here. They largely kept that core together despite not getting it done in the playoffs for a lot of years and getting absolutely embarrassed by the Blue Jackets the one season, getting swept right out of the playoffs. They eventually won 2 cups. Vegas is another team. They could not get over the hump for years. They eventually got it done and largely stuck with the same core group of players. I mean, there were some guys that came and went, but a lot of the same guys that were there from the beginning were there when they won the Stanley Cup as well. And now either the Panthers or the Oilers are going to win the Stanley Cup. The Oilers have, obviously they're built around McDavid and Draisaitl. We know that. The Panthers, this is the exception to the rule here because the Panthers had the President's Trophy 2 years ago and they got swept out of the playoffs by the Lightning, and they decided we need to make wholesale changes. They trade Huberdeau and Weegar to the Flames. They bring in Matthew Tkachuk, and they obviously go with a different coach. Paul Maurice is there after was it Burnett? Who was the guy that coached them in the interim before that? I think it was Burnett. But they make some pretty bold moves, some different changes there, and obviously it's worked out for them. But they're kind of the exception to this rule. You look at other teams like the Avalanche. It took them a while to get there. They stuck with the same core group of players. The Capitals were the poster child of playoff chokers, maybe not just in the NHL, but in all of sports. And eventually, just 1 cup, but they won a Stanley Cup. And I think at this point, as Ranger fans, beggars can't be choosers. If we were told that the Rangers can win just 1 Stanley Cup in the next 5 or even 10 years, I think a lot of us would probably sign up for it in about 2 seconds. So a lot of those teams did stick with that same core group of players, and they eventually got there. The Rangers, they were 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup. The Panthers were the better team. It's that simple. But to, come with the idea that it's impossible for this core group to win the Stanley Cup, I don't see that either. And I do think those 3 players, Mika, Kreider, Panarin, they're probably all back next season. Hopefully there's some other tweaking to the roster and they can bring in, an impactful player or 2. We'll see what happens, and we'll discuss that going forward here on Locked On New York Rangers. But as far as those 3 players, one of them being gone, I just don't see it. Never say never, but I don't think there's really any way that happens. So we'll see how it all shakes out there. Going to keep everything rolling. In just a second, I'm going to take a look at a couple of plays in this series against the Panthers and officially put the Eastern Conference Final in our rear view. We might reference it from time to time every now and then going forward, but it's going to wrap up, our current discussion on this series. And I got to talk about a couple of little plays in that series that I thought, made a really big difference. There's always a couple of plays that keep you up at night, and this series is no exception. And we will get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to go ahead and keep everything rolling here. And like I said, there's a couple of plays. And anytime your team gets bumped out of the playoffs, whether it's the Rangers or I'm sure other fan bases as well, and you're close to winning the Stanley Cup and you lose in 6 games or 7 games, there's always going to be a couple of plays that kind of keep you up at night and just think like, man, if this had just gone this way or that had just gone that way, maybe the Rangers are still playing right now. Maybe we at least get to a game 7. Maybe we beat the Panthers. Maybe we win the Stanley Cup. You never say never. So the more obvious plays are the ones we've already covered. The entire disaster Game 4 overtime period when the Panthers got a power play off of an awful turnover by Mika Zibanejad. And then on the power play, Jacob Trouba just got completely lost and forgot where he was. Cost the Rangers a goal, cost the Rangers the game. Trouba in Game 6, taking himself out of the play. We talked about that, obviously. Roslovic and Mika both missing empty nets in Game 6. Those would have been huge moments in the game if the Rangers were able to score there. So those are the ones that we've kind of covered already. There's a couple of more like under the radar plays, though, that I think really could have made a difference in this series. You go all the way back to Game 1. Braden Schneider gets a breakaway, makes a couple of nice moves on Bobrovsky on the doorstep, puts his shot off the post. The Rangers were only down 1-0 when this happened. And unlike most of the games in the series, I feel like Game 1, the Rangers kind of got better and better as the game went on. A couple of chances to tie it, just didn't happen. Obviously, you get the own goal at the end of that game and then the empty netter, and next thing you know, you lose 3-0. But if that shot by Schneider goes in, maybe the Rangers take control of that game and maybe they win it. I can't say that for sure, but would have been fun to see them at least get an opportunity to do exactly that. I think also in Game 4, Mika Zibanejad's shot goes off of Bobrovsky, off of the crossbar, straight down to the ice, and somehow stays out of the net. At the time in this game, Obviously, it's game 4. The Rangers are up 2-1 in the series, and they were swarming at the start of this game. They were already up 1-0 in this game. If this shot goes into the net, the Rangers are up 2-0, and it's 2 power play goals early in the game. And obviously, the power play struggled. Maybe that would have ignited the power play a little bit. Maybe that would have gotten Mika Zibanejad to relax a little bit. Okay, I got one. Let's build off of this. It didn't happen though. Rangers did a great job on this power play. Puck goes to Mika, and Bobrovsky goes sliding over. It hit him kind of like in the shoulder back area and went straight up, hit the crossbar, went straight down, and stayed out. If that puck goes in, maybe the Rangers win that game. Maybe they have a 3-1 stranglehold on the series at the end of that night, and we'll never know for sure now because that's obviously not what happened. I think another big one, and this is one that we didn't get to talk about nearly enough. It's one that a lot of you have pointed out, the Erik Gustafsson penalty in Game 5. The Rangers were already on the power play. And former Ranger Nico Mikkola has the puck. He goes up the center of the ice, and he basically just steamrolls Igor Shesterkin, just runs him over. Goalie interference is called. Rangers are about to have a 5-on-3 for about a minute and 20 seconds until Erik Gustafsson went after Nico Mikkola. And on one hand, look, these guys have to watch out for each other, and they got to stand up for each other, and you got to protect your goalie. We know that. On the other hand, you got to be able to keep control of your emotions in a situation like this. You have to understand. Now, maybe Gustafsson didn't realize that the penalty had already been called on Mikkola. That's entirely possible, but you got to keep your emotions in check here because had Gustafsson not gone on the attack here, the Rangers, like I said, are going to have a 5-on-3 for a minute and 20 seconds. No guarantee that they score. We know the power play was, frankly, pretty bad for the Rangers in this series, but 5-on-3, I mean, again, it's what I just said a second ago. Would have been fun to at least see the Rangers try. Maybe get a power play goal there. And again, there's some pressure going off the shoulders of the star players. Maybe Mika pots one. Maybe Kreider gets one. Maybe Panarin. I mean, who's to say what could have happened there? And maybe, again, that gets a power play going a little bit. Maybe the Rangers go on to win the game and possibly even the series. So Gustafsson, again, I get it to a certain extent, but you got to keep control of yourself there. And, they had the power play. The power play continued. It was still 5-on-4. Rangers didn't score. And, of course, they end up losing Game 5. Game 6, I'm going to throw out the Panthers' first goal. Obviously, Trouba messed up bad on this play, which is a pretty evergreen statement for the entire playoff run for the New York Rangers. But this shot by Bennett, I mean, it almost looked like it hit all 3 posts. It was like post, crossbar, post. I don't think it actually hit the crossbar, but you could hear when he took the shot, 2 different distinct sounds of the puck hitting the goalpost. It hit both posts and barely got over. There was an overhead shot that they eventually showed. I don't know if they showed it on the ESPN broadcast or if I ended up just seeing it on social media, but you could see the puck basically, it was in the air, but it was in the position that it would be. You know how like the puck stands up on its side every now and then? It was in that position, and you could see just the littlest bit of daylight, the littlest bit of white ice on the rink that separated the goal line from the puck. So at one time or another during that sequence, the puck did clear the goal line there, and it was a good goal. But man, I mean, maybe you get a little bit of a break there and that puck stays out, and who knows what happens. I think if you at least get into the locker room scoreless after one period in Game 6 there, it's a mini win for the Rangers because they started okay in the first period of Game 6, and the Panthers kind of got it back. But if you survive this juggernaut of a team in their building in Game 1, at least if it's scoreless after 1, okay, you know what? We're in this thing. Let's go get it. Let's go make it happen. And unfortunately, that just did not happen. And that goal was scored with about, I want to say about 48 seconds to go in the first period there. And, the game's not over at that point, but that's a serious blow landed by the Panthers at the end of the first period. And if that puck could have just stayed out, I don't know. Maybe the Rangers could figure out a way to get it done. But got that all off my chest, had to vent about those things and talk about some of the biggest moments there that swung the series in the favor of the Panthers. And there's others, and you guys can let me know key sequence that maybe is under the radar a little bit that you think maybe hurt the Rangers in this series, cost the Rangers this series. I'd love to read about it in the comment section. You could always email me as well. Figure we can pretty much call it there. We do now know our Stanley Cup matchup is to be Panthers versus Oilers. I'm not really sure who I'm rooting for yet. It's one of those things I'll kind of like watch the series and just get into one team or the other. Part of me wants to pull for the Oilers because of Chris Knobloch. The other part of me knows that would be very bittersweet if he won the Stanley Cup with another team. And I don't want to hear anybody saying anything, bashing the Rangers about them not hiring Chris Knobloch. Now, if you felt that he should have been the guy all along, you have every right to voice that opinion and make your voice heard. But let's not act like the Peter Laviolette tenure is under a disastrous start here. Because again, the Rangers had the best record in the NHL. This team was, just an embarrassing loss to the Devils in the playoffs last year. And that was obviously not good. And Peter Laviolette comes in and gets the players to buy in. And clearly they bought whatever it was that he was selling and had a heck of a season. We just didn't get the result. And the cold, hard truth is that at the end of the season, 31 of 32 teams are disappointed. And as we found out on Sunday, the Rangers got to join that group. It's not a fun group to be in, but that's also what makes it so special, winning a Stanley Cup. And it's either going to be the Panthers or the Oilers. We'll see how it goes. As far as my prediction, I'm going to say I think the Panthers take it. I think they win in 6 games against the Oilers. I wouldn't have dared said this going into the Rangers-Panthers series, but I felt going into that series that whoever won that series would go on to win the Stanley Cup. And of course, at the time, we didn't know, would it be the Oilers? Would it be the Stars? Of course, we now know it's the Oilers. I'll stick with that. I think it'll be a good series. I think it'll be exciting, but I think the Panthers get the job done. It's just such a deep team and a team that is just absolutely built for playoff hockey. I think the Panthers get it done in 6 games against the Oilers, but you never know for sure. We'll see how the whole thing shakes out. I don't know how much I'm going to watch of it because it's just when the Rangers get that close and they don't make it into the finals, it just makes it that much more difficult to watch the finals because they could be there. It's easier for me to watch the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, obviously, if the Rangers are in it, that's awesome. But if the Rangers were to miss the playoffs, seasons that they had a bad team or a rebuilding team, they would miss the playoffs. And then I could get into the playoffs a little bit because, the Rangers weren't even close to winning a Stanley Cup. But this year, they were close. They fell 6 wins shy. And like I said, we're going to keep everything rolling on Locked On Rangers here and figure out what's next for this team and what they need to do, what they should do in the offseason to hopefully cross the finish line next season. But we will continue to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And obviously looking forward to the draft and free agency and everything else. And once again, thank you guys as always for tuning into this show, your team every day. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with Locked On New York Rangers, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much again, and I will see you next time.